Bring on. Let me tell you all a story that ain't about fairy tales, but it sure started like one. You ever meet someone who checks every box? Looks good, talks smooth, bring on. Seems spiritual when needed, and oh, they text back with Bible verses at night and flirtations in the morning. Yeah, that's what I call a manipulative hookup, bring on. You think it's love, but it's actually a lesson wearing perfume. See, I remember sitting across from this person thinking I had found peace, my forever, been on. We laughed best friends, flirted like high schoolers, and talked deep like philosophers. But deep down, I kept hearing this quiet voice say, bring on, this ain't it. You ever heard that voice? The one that whispers in the silence when the red flags are dressed up in romance. The voice that don't shout, bring on, but it sure knows how to H. But instead of listening, I did what most of us do. I silenced the silence. I drowned it out with the noise of hope, bring on. Hope that they change. Hope I was enough. Hope that love would fix what wisdom was warning me about. That right there is the manipulative hookup, bring on. Not just with people, with life. We hook up with jobs that flatter our ego but exhaust our soul. We connect to people who clap for our wins but pray for our fall, bring on. We say yes to paths that only bring us deeper into stress just because they look like success. And in all this noise and all this chasing, bring on, we forget the one thing that changes the game: stillness, bring on. Let me ask you something. How much have you missed in life because you were too busy chasing what was never meant for you? You see, the real glow up and on, the real success, it don't start with chasing. It starts with staying. Staying silent long enough to hear yourself. Staying silent long enough to heal, bring on. Staying silent long enough to realize, if I gotta force it, beg for it, bring on. Or fake for I bet it ain't mine. Most people miss their blessing not because it wasn't coming, but because they were too loud, too distracted, bring on. Too desperate to recognize it when it arrived. They were too busy trying to make noise in rooms God already closed the doors on. There's power in silence, bring on. The kind of power that makes the wrong people uncomfortable. Because silence is where your discernment grows, bring on. It's where you remember who you were before the world told you who you had to be. Silence is what gives you the ability to say, been on. I don't need to prove nothing to nobody. You don't have to answer every insult. You don't have to post every win, bring on. You don't have to prove every doubt wrong. Stay silent and let life bring it to you. And I get it. Some of y'all saying, but if I don't speak up, bring on, they'll think I'm weak. Baby, silence ain't weakness. It's strategy. Even lions don't roar when they hunt. They move in silence, bring on. And when they pounce, nobody survives. Let's be real. Some of the loudest folks are the most broken. Always talking, always flexing, always doing the most. Bring on. You ever notice that? Silence don't mean you lost. It just means you're working. It means you're listening, bring on. It means you're cooking something behind the scenes that don't need public approval to succeed. See, bring on. When I went through that manipulative hookup season, not just in love, but in friendships, dreams, and life itself, I realized something deep bring on. Life will test you with noise before it trusts you with peace. And the ones who can handle the silence, bring on. They're the ones who end up with the life others dream about. Because here's the thing, bring on. What's yours? What's truly meant for you won't need your chasing. It'll flow. It'll fit. It'll come naturally. And yeah, you still gotta work and on, still gotta show up, but you won't be exhausted trying to force things that don't belong. Stop forcing conversations. Stop forcing connections, bring on. Stop trying to fix folks who are committed to misunderstanding you. Stop screaming for validation from people who never respected your whisper. Be still, bring on. That relationship, if it's yours, it'll stay. That job, if it's aligned, it'll recognize you. That dream, if it's divine, bring on. It'll open doors in silence that noise could never unlock. So many of y'all are out here tired, not because you're working hard, bring on, but because you're working wrong. You're chasing approval, applause, attention, and it's draining you. You don't need to be seen to be valuable, bring on. You just need to be still long enough to recognize your own worth. You think silence is boring. Nah, silence is where power gets refined, bring on. Diamonds don't scream while they're getting cut. Gold don't complain in the fire. And real people, the ones building an unshakable future, bring on. They don't have time to argue with opinions that don't pay their bills or build their peace. So I need you to take a breath. Sit back. Listen. Trust. Ping on. Because when you stop chasing, you start attracting. And when you stop speaking the noise, peace becomes your language. Stay silent. Everything, yes, and on. Everything will come to you naturally. You ever been around folks that just drain you? You walk into the room feeling all right, maybe not perfect, ping on, but okay. In 10 minutes with them, suddenly you're tired, irritated, or second guessing everything about yourself. Let me tell you something, ping on. That ain't just a bad vibe. That's a warning. And here's the kicker: if you're not protecting your energy, life will keep sending you people, problems, ping on, and situations that demand your peace and give you nothing in return. That's why silence, that's your shield. See, ping on, silence ain't just about keeping your mouth shut. Nah, it's about keeping your spirit still. It's about learning how not to jump at every drama, every call, ping on, every you gotta hear this moment. Because truth is, not everything requires your attention, your opinion, or your energy. You got to understanding, ping on. Your peace is expensive. Stop letting people rent it for free. Most of the time, the cows ain't coming from your situation. It's coming from your reaction. Ping on. You stressing about what she said, what he posted, what they doing. And none of that pays your rent. None of it grows your purpose. Ping on. You wasting energy on noise instead of nurturing your calling. You got to get comfortable being unbothered. That's the real strength. Ping on. That's the part people don't understand. When you stop jumping into every fire, you realize most of them burn themselves out without you anyway. Ping on. But if you do keep running into it, now you're seeing bitter and wondering why life feels heavy. It's because you keep showing up to fights that ain't yours. Ping on. Listen, I know it ain't easy. I know sometimes silence feels like weakness, like maybe you should speak up, clap back, prove something. But let me tell you, ping on, silence is the most powerful response you can give to chaos. Because silence says, I know who I am. Ping on, I don't need to explain it to you. And once you reach that level of peace, that level of self-awareness, you become untouchable. Ping on. But not because life stops trying you, but because it can't shake you anymore. When you protect your energy, you stop giving everybody access. Ping on. You stop answering every call. You stop showing up for people who only remember you when they need something. You start saying no without guilt. Ping on. You start resting without apology. You start choosing peace over popularity. You start listening more than you speak. Ping on. Because you know wisdom don't scream. It watches. It's like your phone. You got apps running in the background that you forgot about. Ping on. They draining your battery, stealing power. And you wonder by noon you're already exhausted. That's your life too. You got people, ping on, patterns and pressures running in your background, stealing your energy. And unless you silence them, you'll keep running on empty, ping on. Some of y'all are tired not because you're doing too much, but because you're doing too much for the wrong people. You pouring out and getting nothing back, ping on. You giving advice to folks who don't want healing, just attention. You praying for folks who mock your faith behind your back, ping on. And you wonder why your spirit feels off. You wonder why your dreams ain't moving. It's because your energy is being misused, ping on. Let me be real with you. Peace is your birthright, but it ain't automatic. You gotta protect it. That means guarding your time, ping on. That means watching who you let in your space. That means creating boundaries that don't need to be explained to be respected. And when folks say you've changed, ping on, good, that's the point. Growth looks like silence to those who feed off your noise. Start walking away from the table where your worth is constantly questioned, ping on. Start loving yourself enough to not show up to arguments you've outgrown. Start holding your peace like your future depends on it. Because it does, ping on. That next level you want, it requires a quieter you, a wiser you, a less accessible you. And the moment you decide that your energy matters more than their opinions, ping on, that's the moment your whole life shifts. That's the moment peace stops visiting and starts living with you, ping on. That's the moment you realize you ain't got to chase nothing. You just got to protect everything that's already in you, ping on. And when you start protecting your energy with silence, ping on, that's when the right things begin to find you. You ever notice how loud folks get when they don't understand your silence? Ping on. You ever sit back and watch how uncomfortable people get when you don't react the way they want you to. Ping on. Let me tell you something. When you stop explaining yourself, stop defending your every move. Ping on. Stop responding to every little jab or shade thrown your way. Suddenly everybody got something to say. Ping on. And that's exactly how you know you're doing something right. See, people get nervous when they can't read you, when they can't control how you respond. Ping on. When you don't take the bait. Silence, man, silence is power. It's louder than any clap back you could ever give. The moment you stop talking, ping on, they start wondering, and that wondering turns into fear. Not fear of you, but fear of what you're becoming without needing their validation. Let them talk, ping on. Let him run their mouths. Let them write the group chats. Let them post their little indirect comments. That's all background noise. Because the truth is, ping on, you people will always have opinions. That ain't new. You could be the kindest soul walking and somebody's still gonna twist your name up. Ping on. You could be doing the right thing for the right reasons and still end up the villain in somebody's story. That ain't your problem. Your silence tells them, ping on. I'm not here for the drama. I'm here for the destination. Ping on. Now, when you decide to move different, when you start protecting your peace, ping on. When you stop showing up for conversations that don't build you, it'll make some folks uncomfortable. Ping on. Especially the ones who only knew how to access you through chaos. Because some people don't miss you. They miss the version of you they could manipulate. Ping on. When that part of you goes silent, they don't know what to do with it. Let me be real with you. Your silence ain't just peace, it's protection. Ping on. Because not everything deserves a response. Some things are so beneath your growth, it would be a disservice to even acknowledge them. Ping on. You can't be elevating and still arguing with folks who ain't even qualified to be in the room you're headed to. Ping on. You don't owe nobody an explanation for choosing yourself. You don't owe nobody clarity for walking away from confusion. Your life is not a press conference. Ping on. And here's the kicker, silence doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're wise. Ping on. It means you've grown enough to realize that some battles ain't even worth your breath. That's grown man talk. That's grown woman power. Ping on. You're not avoiding confrontation. You just got nothing to prove. You know who you are now. And when you know who you are, ping on. You stop needing to respond just to feel seen. You don't need applause when you already know your worth. Let them talk. They talked when you were broke. Ping on. They talked when you got blessed. They talked when you were struggling. They talked when you started winning. The talking never stops. But here's what does stop. Ping on. Your response. At some point, you just get tired of explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Ping on. You get tired of wasting your breath on folks who don't even hear your heart. You know what happens when you stay silent and focused. Ping on. People start telling stories to fill in the blanks. They start creating their own narratives. Let them. Because while they're talking, you're building. Ping on. While they're gossiping, you're grinding. While they're watching your moves, you're making the next one. Let them stay confused. Ping on. Your silence is not a lack of words, it's a presence of purpose. And purpose don't shout. Purpose don't argue. Purpose don't compete. Purpose moves. Ping on. Quietly, confidently. Purpose is that thing that says, I don't need you to get it. I just need to keep going. I see. Ping on. The most powerful people I know waste time defending their name. They live it. They don't run behind lies. They rise above them. Ping on. And they sure don't try to fix what people say behind their back. Because real character don't need a mic. So let them talk. Let them guess. Let you wonder. Ping on. While you stay silent and stay focused. Because in the end, the results will always speak louder than your words ever could. Ping on. You ever been in a situation where someone's trying to get a rise out of you? I mean, they poking you, prodding you, ping on, saying slick stuff, trying to make you react. They want that reaction so bad because they think if they can get it, they still got control over you. Ping on. But I'm going to tell you something today that's going to save you a whole lot of peace, pride, and purposey. Ping on. You don't have to react to everything that comes your way. Matter of fact, the strongest version of you, the most powerful, the most healed, ping on, the most mature version is the one that can look at chaos, smile, and keep walking. Not because you're soft, not because you're scared, ping on, but because you choose peace over petty. You choose destiny over drama. See, reacting to everything is how they drag you into their level. Not reacting, on. That's how you remind them you're not on it. On. Some of y'all keep getting pulled in a mess not because you ain't wise, but because you still think silence means surrender. On. You think that if you don't speak up, if you don't set the record straight, if you don't check them, you losing something. On. Let me ask you this. What are you really losing when you protect your peace? On. What are you actually giving up when you refuse to argue with somebody that ain't got a clue where you're headed? See, on. Silence doesn't mean you're ignoring the problem. It means you're mastering your response. You learn how to breathe through the nonsense. On. You learn how to pause instead of pounce. That pause right there, that's power. That pause is where wisdom steps in and says, on. It ain't worth it. Are you ever been around folks who are always fighting, always got beef, always got something to say about somebody? That ain't strength. On. That's exhaustion wearing a mask. People who are really at peace don't need to announce it. They walk in a room and you feel it. On. That's what not reacting gives your presence. And presence makes noise without making a sound. Now don't get it twisted. This ain't about being passive. On. This ain't about letting folks walk all over you. This is about choosing where your energy goes. On. You ain't got to prove who you are to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't owe them that. Every time you react, on, you teach people how to pull you. You teach them your triggers. You show them your emotional passwords. And after a while, on, you don't even realize it, but they're using your own buttons to control your mood. You got to get to the place where your peace is not negotiable. On. Where your silence ain't because you're scared, it's because secure. Secure in who you are, secure in your calling, secure in your growth. On. You ain't got time to play in the dirt with folks who don't even own the land. You're too focused on building something bigger than their opinion. On. Let me say this loud and clear. Not every battle is yours to fight. Some of these battles are invitations to prove you haven't grown. Don't take the bait. On. Don't let somebody with no purpose pull you out of yours. That's how you lose momentum. Arguing with folks who never even started moving. And I know, on. I know, it's hard. Sometimes you want to say something, you want to respond, but you got to ask yourself, on, is this going to help me or drain me? Because sometimes what feels like standing up for yourself is really just slowing yourself down. On. I'll tell you what's better than proving people wrong with words, proving them wrong with results. You want to shut down the noise. Go win. On. You want to silence the critics. Go shine. Let your success be your speech. Let your peace be your presence. Let your growth be your greatest clapback. On. The ones that matter, they'll notice. And the ones that don't, they'll talk anyway. You ain't responsible for clearing up every misunderstanding. On. You're responsible for protecting the energy you need to become who you're destined to be. So don't react. On. Just rise. You ever notice how when you stop chasing things, they start finding their way to you? That's not coincidence. That's alignment. On. That's what happens when you finally decide to stop begging, stop forcing, stop running after stuff that don't want you, need you, or deserve you. On. It's what happens when you finally say, I'm done chasing, I'm attracting. And baby, that's when everything shifts. See, on. There's a difference between hustle and desperation. There's a difference between ambition and anxiety. Chasing will have you tired, stretched thin, on. Always trying to prove something. Attracting. That's different. That's when you stand firm in who you are. That's when you work, yeah. But you don't beg, on. You don't compromise your value to be seen. You let your presence, your character, your peace do the talking. Let me say it like this. If it's for you, on, it's going to find you. That doesn't mean you sit around and wait for life to knock on your door, on. But it does mean you stop forcing doors open that were meant to stay closed. Some of y'all are out here chasing people that already let you go, on. Chasing jobs that keep overlooking you. Chasing approval from folks who don't even like themselves. And for what? On. So you can be accepted in a place where your spirit don't even feel safe. That ain't living. That's surviving. And you weren't built just to survive. On. You were built to flow. You were built to walk in such a rhythm with life that what's meant for you naturally gravitates towards you. Not because you're perfect, not because you're loud, but because you're ready, you're aligned. And alignment don't require hustle. It requires stillness, faith, and consistency. You ever try chasing a butterfly? The more you chase it, the more it flies away. But the moment you sit still, the moment you relax, it just might land on your shoulder. Life works the same way. You chase love, it runs. You chase money, it slips through your fingers. You chase validation, it turns into anxiety. But when you focus on becoming, not begging, on building, not forcing, everything changes. Stop running after folks who left. Stop calling people who stopped responding. Stop watering plants that don't grow. You don't chase what's yours. You're attracted by who you become. The better you get, the less you have to pursue. Because the more authentic you become, the more the right things begin to recognize your energy. And the wrong things, they start falling away on their own. Let's be real. A lot of people only chase things because they didn't believe they deserved better. So they settled. They lowered their standards. They played small so they could be accepted. But the moment you decide, I'm not chasing nothing that drains me, that's when you start walking like you know your worth. And that walk, that energy, it changes the whole room. I'm talking about walking into an interview like you already know you belong, walking into a relationship like you already know what you bring to the table. Walking through life knowing that you ain't got to compete or convince. Just be. Because when you start living like that, life will match you. Opportunities will start opening. People will start seeing you different. Not because you're loud, but because you're solid. See, what most people don't realize is that chasing is rooted in fear. Fear that if you don't chase, you'll miss out. Fear that you'll be forgotten. But the truth is, when you chase, you usually end up with something that don't even fit your purpose. You end up in rooms where your spirit don't belong. You end up in situations that look good on the outside but feel empty on the inside. And now you're stuck, exhausted, pretending to be happy just because you got what you chased. Nah, that's not the life we were meant for. You don't need to chase when you know you're chosen. You don't need to run when you know who you are. Stay grounded. Stay focused. Keep working on you. Get better. Heal. Grow. Trust. And let what's yours find you in the silence, in the stillness, in the strength of your self-respect. Because when you stop chasing, that's when everything meant for you starts chasing you. There's something powerful about sitting in silence and finally hearing your own voice again. Not the one that's been drowned out by opinions, not the one shaped by pressure or fear, but your real voice, the one that knows what you want, the one that knows what you deserve. That voice don't shout, it whispers. And if you keep living in noise, you'll miss it every time. Some of y'all been listening to everybody but yourselves. Family, friends, social media, everybody's voice but yours. And that's why you feel lost. That's why you feel like you're spinning in circles. Because when you don't hear yourself, you forget who you are. But let me tell you something, your next level is hidden inside your quiet moments. It's in the stillness that your real voice comes alive. When you finally stop talking just to fill space, stop reacting just to be heard, you create room for that inner voice to rise. And that voice, that's your direction. That's your GPS. That's your guide. Most people miss their calling not because it wasn't speaking, but because they were too loud to hear it, too distracted to recognize it, too afraid to sit with themselves. You ever sit in silence and feel uncomfortable? Like you grab your phone, turn on music, call somebody, anything to avoid being alone with your thoughts. That ain't boredom, that's avoidance. That's you running from the very thing that's trying to help you heal, trying to give you clarity. Silence will show you things noise never will. It will confront you with truth. It will tell you what needs to go, who needs to go, and what you need to stop pretending you're okay with. But here's the beauty: when you push through that discomfort, when you sit in that silence long enough, you'll start hearing the version of you that's been waiting to speak. The one who's clear, the one who's confident, the The one who knows that life doesn't have to be a constant performance just to prove worth. Ping on. You realize you're not here to impress, you're here to express. You're here to grow into who you already are. Ping on. That's why you got to learn how to quiet the world around you so you can connect with the world inside you. Because if you don't know your own voice, ping on, you'll fall for anybody else's. You'll be led by every comment, every expectation, every criticism. And before you know it, stepping on, you're living a life that looks successful, but don't feel like Ed or you. Let me make it plain, you can't walk in purpose with borrowed confidence. Ping on, you can't make real moves on fake identities. Ping on, you've got to reconnect with the truth inside you. And that only happens when you stop talking long enough to listen. Not to others, not to the crowd, ping on, but to your soul. And here's the thing, when you start hearing yourself clearly, you stop asking for permission. You stop waiting on applause, ping on. You stop seeking advice from people who ain't even walked your path. You know how many folks got opinions on your journey, but wouldn't last one day living it. Ping on, stop giving your ears to people who couldn't handle your shoes. Your voice, your real voice, is the most valuable compass you have. Tapping on. And when it finally comes through, it won't sound like ego. It won't sound like pride. It'll sound like a peace. That's how you know it's you. Ping on. Peace don't come to convince, it comes to confirm. And the more time you spend in that silence, the stronger that voice gets. And when that voice gets strong, ping on, you stop shrinking, guessing, you stop settling. Ping on, you don't chase, they come to you. You don't beg, they as offer. Because confidence built in silence is the kind that lasts, so let them talk. Ping on, let the world spin, let the noise keep making noise. You just sit still, ping on. And finally, hear yourself. You ever feel like the world is pulling you in every direction? Like every time you look around, ping on, somebody's telling you what you should be doing. Ping on, you should be making more money. You should be married by now. You should be further along. And if you're not careful, stepping on, you start living for pressure instead of purpose. You start performing instead of becoming. And let me tell you, that's a trap. See, ping on, when you're chasing pressure, you're living on a timeline that ain't even yours. You're out here comparing your chapter 3 to somebody else's chapter 30, ping on. And that pressure, it'll make you jump into jobs you hate, relationships you ain't ready for, and lifestyles that don't even fit your spirit, ping on. All because you felt like you were supposed to. But baby, supposed to according to what? Who? Purpose don't rush you, it don't guilt you, it don't shame you. Ping on, purpose says, take your time, grow right, stay true. But pressure says, hurry up, look busy, ping on. Don't fall behind. That's why some folks look successful but feel empty. Because they ain't aligned, they just moving fast in the wrong direction. Ping on, you gotta stop letting the world define your worth. Stop letting outside noise drown out your inside truth. Because when you align with your purpose, ping on, you move different. You're not chasing trends. You're chasing a truth. You're not trying to keep up. You're trying to level up in your own time, stepping on in your own lane. Let me break this down. Alignment is peace. When you're aligned, your actions match your values. Your lifestyle reflects your heart. Ping on, you stop doing things just for applause and start doing things that feed your soul. Ping on, you don't feel like you're constantly hustling to prove your existence. You're flowing with intention. Now look, pressure is real. Ping on, I'm not saying it ain't. Life will hit you with deadlines, bills, responsibilities. That's facts. But don't confuse external pressure with internal purpose. Stepping on, because pressure pushes you to perform, purpose pulls you to grow. Pressure says do it now or else. Purpose says trust the process. The problem is, ping on, we've been trained to believe that fast means successful. But fast ain't always right. A microwave can heat it up, but a slow roast will feed you deeper. Ping on, same thing with your journey. Don't rush it just to say you arrived. Build it so that when you arrive, you stay. Some of y'all feel lost, ping on, not because you're lazy, but because you're not aligned. You're living for likes, not for legacy. You're following fear, not faith. And deep down, ping on, you know it. That's why you feel tired even after the win. Stepping on, that's why the celebration don't feel right. Because you know you weren't supposed to be in that race to begin with. Stepping on, let me tell you something personal. Alignment ain't loud. It don't need to be. When you're aligned, you sleep better. You breathe easier. You stop competing. Stepping on, you stop explaining. You don't need 10 people to co-sign your decision. You got peace. And peace is better than applause every single time. Stepping on, don't let pressure rush you into becoming something you were never meant to be. Just because it looks right doesn't mean it feels right. Stepping on. And if it costs you your joy, your values, your identity, it's too expensive. You got to ask yourself, is this really for me? Stepping on, or is this just what people expect of me? Because when you're aligned, even your no's feel good. You stop saying yes out of guilt. Stepping on, you stop moving out of fear. You realize that timing is everything, and your time don't have to look like theirs. Stepping on, you start understanding that what's meant for you won't pass you by just because you're walking instead of sprinting. Stepping on, and what ain't meant for you won't stick, even if you chase it like your life depends on it. You don't need to be everything to everybody. Stepping on, you just need to be true to who you are. That's alignment. That's purpose. That's peace. So stop chasing pressure. Start choosing purpose. Spin and let peace be your guide. Stepping on, you ever walk into a room and just feel peace before anybody even says a word? That's what happens when somebody ain't trying to prove nothing. They just are. Stepping on. They don't have to talk about what they've done, who they know, what they've overcome. You feel it in the way they carry themselves. Stepping on, you feel it in their presence. That kind of peace, it speaks louder than any words ever could. That's what happens when you let peace do the talking. See, tapping on, most folks trying to be heard, trying to be seen, trying to be validated, they make a whole lot of noise. But noise don't equal power. In fact, stepping on, the loudest one in the room is usually the weakest. When you got peace in your heart, you don't need to compete. You don't need to compare. Stepping on, you don't need to convince. You just show up and you let your presence speak for itself. Stepping on, now don't get me wrong. There was a time in my life I wanted to prove everybody wrong. I wanted to show them what they missed out on. Stepping on, I wanted to make sure they knew they messed up when they counted me out. I wanted to be loud with it. But somewhere along the way, I realized, stepping on, I was wasting energy because real peace don't need to prove anything. It just is. When you have peace, your spirit is calm. Not because everything is perfect, stepping on, but because you've stopped letting imperfection shake you. You don't need to chase people. You don't need to defend yourself. Stepping on, you don't need to respond to every little thing. Peace makes you untouchable, not in a prideful way, but in a powerful one. Stepping on, because the world can try to throw storms at you. But when your peace is strong, you don't flinch. Let me tell you what peace sounds like. Stepping on. It sounds like walking away without slamming the door. It sounds like choosing not to argue, even when you know you're right. Stepping on. It sounds like sitting in silence while your blessings make the announcement. That's grown energy right there. That's power. Stepping on. You ever try to argue with somebody who won't engage? It's frustrating, ain't it? That's what peace does. It disarms chaos. It confuses drama. Stepping on. It silences mess. And not because you don't have a response, but because you know your energy is too expensive to waste. Stepping on, you don't owe everybody an explanation. You don't have to tell your side of the story. Stepping on, you don't need to set the record straight. You just need to keep showing up as the best version of you. Keep moving in silence. Stepping on, and let your growth do all the talking. Because while they're watching, you're rising. While they're speculating, you're evolving. And eventually, stepping on, they'll stop talking, not because they don't want to, but because your peace makes it pointless. Stepping on. Peace is the language of someone who's been through the fire and came out gold. Someone who knows their worth and don't need a round of applause to feel it. Stepping on. Someone who can walk away from noise, from negativity, from manipulation without leaving a trace of bitterness behind. You want to win. Stepping on. Learn how to stay calm in chaos. Learn how to keep your cool when they expect you to explode. Learn how to walk with grace when they wanted you to stumble. Stepping on. That's what separates people who just survive from people who thrive. You don't need to announce your next move. You don't need to shout about your growth. Stepping on. Let peace talk. Let your discipline talk. Let your glow talk. Let your silence be the loudest thing in the room. Stepping on. Because when peace becomes your voice, That's when the world really starts listening. Let me ask you something right here, right now, and don't just nod. Stepping on. Don't just scroll past it. Really sit with this. When was the last time you sat in silence? Not just with no noise, but with yourself. Stepping on, not with your phone buzzing, not with somebody in your ear, not while scrolling, not while faking peace on the outside. I mean real silence, stillness, stepping on. That deep quiet where you finally hear your own voice again. Because that's where the shift begins. That's where the clarity comes. Stepping on, that's where the healing starts. Now I know life can be loud with pressure, loud with expectations, loud with heartbreak, noise, opinions, deadlines, stepping on, social media, and everybody telling you what to do, except the one person who matters most to you. Stepping on. That's why this message wasn't about staying silent, just to stay invisible. No, it's about understanding the power of silence. Silence is strategy. Stepping on. Silence is protection. Silence is peace. Silence is alignment. Silence is when you stop reacting and start evolving. You don't have to clap back. Stepping on. You don't have to argue. You don't have to run behind what's already running from you. Stepping on. You just have to be still long enough for what's meant for you to catch up. You hear me? Because when you stay silent long enough, you stop chasing. Stepping on and you start attracting. You stop performing and you start becoming. You stop explaining and you start building. Some of you have been so busy defending your name, stepping on, explaining your worth, proving your heart, that you forgot your silence could do more than your words ever could. Let your life speak now. Let your healing speak. Stepping on. Let your glow up speak. Let your peace do the talking. And if you've been going through it lately, if you've felt unseen, unheard, misunderstood, stepping on, even underestimated, this right here is your reminder you ain't gotta yell. You ain't gotta beg. Stepping on, you ain't gotta explain to people who ain't even qualified to judge your journey. You just need to go quiet and go higher. Because what's for you? Stepping on, it's coming, not when you force it, not when you stress it, not when you scream for it. It comes when you align, it comes when you heal. Stepping on. It comes when you get still long enough to receive it. So I'll leave you with this question, and I want you to be real with yourself. Stepping on. What's one thing you need to stop reacting to so you can finally start living again? That person, that opinion, that situation. Let it go. Stepping on. And let peace carry you to the life you've been praying for. Now, if this message stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you of your strength, your power, stepping on, your worth, then do one thing for me. Drop a comment below and tell me what you're walking away from today. Stepping on. Tell me what you're leaving behind so your purpose can move forward. And if you felt this message in your spirit, like, share and subscribe to this channel. Stepping on. We don't do fake inspiration here. We do truth, growth, and real talk. Because you deserve more than noise. You deserve a life that feels as good as it looks. Stepping on. And guess what? You don't have to say a word. Your peace will speak for you.